News: a nationalist event is being staged today in Hebron, the largest city in the West Bank, home to more than 200,000 Palestinians and some 700 Israeli Jews, who are today parading with Israeli flags in the city center where they reside. And that's happening, of course, under heavy IDF guard. Our Mary McAuliffe is in Hebron. Mary, what is the context of this march? We just had a Jerusalem Day parade in Israel that was heavily guarded by Israeli military and police officers. What's this parade for?
That's right, Ariel. So you can think of this basically as a smaller Jerusalem Day. It's many of the same ideologies, many of the same types of people with similar political ideologies who are coming here, just on a much smaller scale. Here in Hebron, there's some 700 to 900 Jews who live inside the city of 200,000 Palestinians. Our cameraman, Dean Barenboim, can show you some of these people leaving before we fully leave the march, but we can pan to the side to show you the numbers of people. You can see all the different Israeli flags. So much like the scenes in Jerusalem, coming through to show their nationalist pride, to demonstrate and to have this show of what they see as Israeli sovereignty in this contested city. And there are a number of items along the way that are demonstrating that, including this stop. So they're moving on now, but they were stopped just right before this house that was recently bought by one of these right-wing organizations. You can see the sign right up there. It says Beit HaChirut, the House of Freedom or the House of Liberty. It was bought by a Palestinian family, but it came after a number of donations to actually buy this house, and it's part of efforts by this organization to try and solidify the presence of the Jews inside Hebron. Of course, this is all happening in the background of massive clashes that took place throughout the West Bank yesterday, including here in Hebron, where a 17-year-old Palestinian teenager was killed by IDF forces in clashes. So we can definitely feel the heavy security presence, which there always is really in this city, but certainly more so today. They're seeing a number of areas are blocked off, roads into the Palestinian areas of Hebron also blocked off, and checkpoints put up to actually let this march go on, to let these Jews walk through the city, to try and make sure and safeguard that nothing happens along the way.
So, Mary, give us a bit of context on events in Hebron in the last few years. It has been fairly quiet, relatively, but there are sporadic incidents that happen there between the Jewish settlers and the Palestinian population of around 200,000 that we are getting reports of every once in a while. How has the situation been like recently? And if there has been relative calm, what has contributed to that?
Right, Ariel. So certainly if we're comparing it to the years of the Palestinian intifadas, the mass uprising in Palestinian areas in the West Bank, of course, it's more quiet here in Hebron. We haven't seen any of these massive clashes taking place. This is also due a large part to the heavy security presence that is put in place in the West Bank, but also especially Hebron, as there are such a small number of Jews who are living inside the city. It's also worth noting it's one of the oldest Jewish populations continuously living in Hebron. So here in the West Bank is living there. And they are protecting this, but it also means that freedom of access for many of the Palestinians is heavily restricted to allow for this presence here. Many of their roads they cannot walk on a normal daily basis. So there are often smaller clashes that break out due to this, due to the tensions in the city, which really become more neighborly clashes that are breaking out. People are really living parallel lives next to each other in this city with no real interactions except for when it comes to the tensions that happen. On a day-to-day basis, it is much quieter. But of course, when clashes break out in the West Bank, we often see them break out also here in Hebron. That's exactly what we saw yesterday following that massive operation into Nablus that saw 3 members of Islamic Jihad killed, including one of the leaders, and then clashes in retaliation, many Palestinians demonstrating against Israeli forces. So we often see some of this conflict spilling out in Hebron.